Member for Caribou, Prince George.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it is indeed a pleasure to be back in the House and speaking on this subject that we have before us today, and that is Bill C-68. And Bill C-68, from a policy perspective, is another piece of unnecessary legislation aimed at making Canadians feel good. It's filled with fluff. It is all about pandering to environmental groups. It is all about making sure that, well, those that backed the Liberals in the 2015 election are getting their due. Much as what we saw earlier when we had the member of Parliament from Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake speak. And for those that are in the audience, and if you were falling asleep previously, stay tuned because it's about to get a little bit more lively. I promise you this in my short period of time that I've got. So that the member of Parliament from Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake stood up and talked about how the investment, he was proud about his investment, the government investing in fisheries and investing in areas within his region, and his own family has just received a lucrative surf clam quota worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You've heard that correctly. I'm going to look right at the camera, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to say that. Again, the Liberal Member of Parliament's own brother just received, that's the Liberal Member of Parliament from Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake, own brother just received a lucrative surf clam quota worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and all on a bid that was, well, there are lots of questions with it. And so I would beg to differ in terms of some of the points that have been put forth about open and transparent and how, you know, this minister seems to be going about doing the right things. Well, he's spending a lot of money. There's no two ways about it. He's spending a lot of money, but is there value that is going to come out of that money? And who is benefiting from the money that is being spent? And I would hesitate to say that, Mr. Speaker, that Bill C-68 is going to be the stopgap, is going to be the changes that these people that the government is putting forth, that they're saying that is going to have such a profound impact on our waterways and our fisheries. Mr. Speaker, I sit on the Fisheries Committee and had the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and Canadian Coast Guard before us numerous times. And I'm going to say that we just heard just last week that our northern cod is at near decimated levels. You see, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and Canadian Coast Guard likes to throw money at things, but they don't like to throw money at things that are going to have an impact on those that are in the communities, and they haven't done anything that is going to help create more fish so that we have fish for the future, fish not only for today but for the future. And the changes that they have put forth, and they said that Prime Minister Harper has absolutely gutted the Fisheries Act, and I will be the first to admit that the Fisheries Act has been around for about 150 years, and maybe it needed some modernization. But the changes that they've put forth, absolutely are, it's more fluff than anything else. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, we had numerous witnesses that, bless you, we've got one of the pages that just sneezed, so I'm going to say bless you, I'll stop at that. But we had numerous witnesses that came before the committee, and whether they were academic or whether they were the environmental groups, the NGOs that we like to call, that have a steady stream into this minister's office. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, we have local fishers and people in those communities that say, you know what, with the Conservatives, at least we knew that we had an ear of the ministers. Now we have to go through the NGOs to get to the ministers, because the ministers place greater importance on the NGOs than they do on those that actually matter the most, and that's Canadians. Those are the communities and the Canadians that their policy impacts the most. You know, it's interesting, you know, again, we've got the Member of Parliament from Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake, and we've had the Prime Minister stood up, and we've had the Minister of Fisheries stand up and talk about the surf clam, how it's all about reconciliation, and yet, Mr. Speaker, the winning bid had no First Nations, no multiple First Nations partners, which was, I'll add, and I'll say it again, was a critical component of bid criteria. None until after the bid was announced. 3 weeks later, there was an announcement of the First Nations that were there. Their bid actually included just placeholders and said, hey, trust us, we'll get that done. Guess what, Mr. Speaker? That Member of Parliament's brother, the group that got the bid wasn't even incorporated, wasn't even a legal entity, as a matter of fact. They weren't. They didn't have a boat, didn't have a vessel, they didn't have a facility to do this. So it really leads people to believe that, well, there's a smell there that just doesn't smell right, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, it sounds very corrupt. And so it's very rich to have that Member of Parliament stand up in the House and actually speak and preach about his open and transparent government he's so proud of. Well, obviously he's proud of it because his family's benefiting hundreds of millions of dollar quota. Unacceptable. And yeah, that's right. As we know, if it's open and transparent. It's transparent. If you are a Liberal insider or a Liberal family member, hey, you know what? You get the appointment. If you are a Liberal insider or family member, you get the job. If you are a Liberal insider or family member, guess what? You get the quota. And that's what we're seeing. And today, Bill C-68, Mr. Speaker, it is interesting that we have these people that are saying that Prime Minister Harper absolutely decimated this. I'm going to tell you that this is more of an attack on Prime Minister Harper and folks disliking Prime Minister Harper than his policy, and that's shameful. Because not one witness that came to our committee to testify on this, not one could demonstrate any loss of fish habitat, fish habitat, because of the 2012. And that is academics, that is environmental groups, that is fishers or industry experts. Nobody. And we asked, look, Conservatives want to make sure that we have the appropriate balance between economy and environment. We do not want to see our rivers, lakes, and streams ruined. I'm a hunter. I'm a fisher. Our family has farmed. We have logged. We have fished. We have hunted our property in the Cariboo-Chilcotin for generations. And we want to make sure it's there for future generations. And it's shameful how we get this, it's just, holier than thou attitudes when all they're doing is pandering to special interest groups. It really is. And if you can tell that I'm a little heated, it's because I was in Grand Bank, Newfoundland earlier this week, and I talked with Edgar, I talked with Brenda, Barbara, Bernice, Barry, I talked with Tom, I talked with Kevin, I talked with people that are impacted by the decisions that this minister has made, policy decisions that this minister has made that impact that community. 300 years of fishing history. And they've had their ups and downs, and they've had consistent economic viability. They've been okay for about 27 years in terms of this surf clam fishery, but this arbitrary decision to take away 25% of the quota from that community is it's unacceptable, and it's going to see job losses. And Edgar told us, look, I don't want to go on EI. I want a job. I've had 52 weeks of work this year, and this decision looks like I'm going to lose 17 weeks of work. I don't want EI. I want to work. And we heard that time and time again. And shamefully, it seems like the minister's more intent on looking after his Liberal family and friends than the families of Grand Bank. It's disappointing, Mr. Speaker, and frankly, it's shameful. And with that, I'm going to I'll cede the floor. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for St. Catharines.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his speech. A few years back, I was visiting Washington State and in Puget Sound, I had the opportunity to take a whale sightseeing tour. And we followed a pod of orcas from Puget Sound all the way to within sight of Vancouver Island. And it was impressive to watch these animals travel this incredible distance. But in my part of the world, in Niagara, there's 20 minutes from my home, there's a place called Marineland that has an orca in a very small tank. This piece of legislation speaks to that, and to prevent individuals from capturing whales like orcas and for captivity. This is a practice that needs to end, and I was wondering if the honourable member could comment on that practice and what he and his party think about that.
The honourable member for Caribou Prince George.
Well, I want to thank the honourable colleague for his question. You know, there's no two ways about it. We live in a beautiful province. We are adjacent Washington State. Our waters are pristine. We've got some of the most iconic vistas and views, and I only need to go back to when we hosted the world with the 2010 Olympics, and the world got to see what Vancouver and British Columbia really had to offer, Mr. Speaker, and I too have gone on whale watching trips, and I agree that they are majestic beasts and are just beautiful. We should do whatever we can to save them. Mr. Speaker, I would like to, through you, pose a question back as how he feels about one of his Liberal colleagues' brothers getting a lucrative surf clam quota worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his remarks. I do have a question in regard to this contract, this crab fishery contract, and I think in light of Shawinigan and the sponsorship scandal, I'm a little concerned that the governing party is back to its old tricks. But I would like him to please explain how this consortium that he described was able to get around the requirement that Indigenous people be involved. I would be very interested in how they achieve that.
For Caribou Prince George.
That is an excellent question, and one that many people have questions or questions regarding it, including First Nation groups that actually submitted a bid. So there were First Nations that actually submitted a bid that were, unsuccessful in it, and then there's a group that was successful that didn't have any First Nations in it, only had placeholders. As a matter of fact, they said, don't worry about it, we'll get them after we get the bid. And that's what happened. There are a lot of questions, Mr. Speaker, a lot of questions. And, the Minister and the Prime Minister said, how dare we try to pit First Nation versus non-First Nation? As a matter of fact, this decision has nothing to do with reconciliation and more to do with just looking after Liberal friends and family, and it's shameful because, Mr. Speaker, there were First Nations involved in bids. Many First Nations, multiple First Nations put bids in and were unsuccessful. However, the group that got it had no First Nations in until 3 weeks after the winning bid was announced. Thank you.
We have time for one more short question and response. The honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And like the honourable member, I couldn't believe the audacity that the Liberal Party would have having the member from Preston, Sackville, Chesapeake stand up in this House and speak to this issue, given the fact that his brother was just given hundreds of millions of dollars in quota. Now, I know the honourable member was out in Newfoundland this week. He spoke generally about the impact that this has, about people wanting to work, not wanting to be on employment insurance, and the Liberal Party's intent of making the employment insurance system the largest employer in this country. I'd like to hear from the honourable member on what he heard in Newfoundland.
The honourable member for Caribou Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, we talked with family members that, listen, I'll tell you exactly. So we were talking to a lady on the plant, and she said, we have lost brothers, we have lost sons, we have lost fathers, we have lost uncles and grandfathers in fisheries. We have 300 years of fishery history. And they said that the scars